Hello and welcome to episode 9 of Courtside. I'm your host, Andrew Cohen. Courtside is a podcast dedicated to all things sports. In today's episode, I will do a complete NBA season preview. I will give my projected standings, make picks for the major awards, and make some bold predictions for the season. It is a loaded episode of the podcast today, so sit back, relax, and take a seat. Courtside. Before I get into the NBA season preview, I just want to remind you guys to go check out and follow the Courtside podcast on Twitter. The Twitter handle is @thecourtsidepod. I posted my picks for this week's NFL games on there earlier today, so be sure to go look at who I had winning and see where I was right and where I was wrong. I will also post a link to the Twitter in the description of the podcast. Alright, let's move on to the NBA season preview. For those of you that listened to my NFL season preview, you will know that I talked about every team for about 30 seconds to a minute and then picked the over-under on the projected win total according to Vegas. For the NBA preview, though, I'm going to do something a little bit different. I just don't think it makes sense to do the way I did for the NFL. Instead of simply just going over every team, I'm going to do a few segments for the preview. I'll start off by giving projected standings for each conference and then explain why I chose the order I did. So, let's begin with the Eastern Conference. Okay, let's start off with the Boston Celtics. I have them finishing first in the Eastern Conference. And to me, you are just crazy if you don't think the Celtics are going to win the East. They have the most overall talent, the best bench, and the best coach. I'm locking them in for the number 1 seed. Okay, the number 2 spot, I have the Philadelphia 76ers. The Sixers are very good, but I don't see how anybody could think they're as good as the Celtics. They put each other in the Eastern Conference semifinals last year, and the Celtics just dominated the series. And that was without Kyrie Irving and Gordon Hayward, who they will get back now. The 76ers, they didn't really add anybody too good to their roster. Markelle Fultz is back, so we'll see how he does. This team's going to win a lot of games, but just not enough to get the first seed. All right, the number 3 team I have in the East is the Milwaukee Bucks. Listen, Giannis is the real deal, and the Bucks finally put together a decent team around him last year to win. Unfortunately, they didn't have the coach to get them to coach them to victories. Mike Budenholzer, the new coach of the Milwaukee Bucks, formerly the head coach of the Hawks, that were the first seed for I think 2 years in a row. And he was before that an assistant for Greg Popovich in the Spurs. I think he's going to help out in that department, in that coaching department. However, they're just not as good as the Sixers or the Celtics, in my opinion. All right, moving on to the number 4 spot. I'm going with the Indiana Pacers. I think Victor Oladipo is legit, and I love the addition of Tyreke Evans. I think it's one of the more underrated moves of the offseason. And he's coming off, in my opinion, at least his best professional season. And the Pacers really can only go up from here. Unfortunately for them, the rise of the Bucks, the improvement of the Sixers and the Celtics means they probably won't get a top 3 seed, however. All right, next up at the number 5 spot, I have the Toronto Raptors. And I would have had them higher, but I think a huge part of Toronto's success over the past few years was because not only because of the talent of DeMar DeRozan, but I think also the special bond he had with Kyle Lowry on and off the court, really. I mean, they off the court were just best friends, joking around. I think the team chemistry there was really high. Now with Kawhi Leonard there instead of him, I think the team's going to have to find a way to come together and really gel. And usually this is something that's going to take a little bit of time. So I just don't think the Raptors are going to have enough early season success to finish with the top 4 seed. All right. Next up, at number 6, I have the Miami Heat. And now is really where we get into the crapshoot part of the standings, where really no team is even, really going to sniff the playoffs if they're in the Western Conference. But they're going to make the playoffs in the East potentially for these next couple. And for the Miami Heat, I just don't think they're that good, to be honest with you. I mean, listen, Dragic is a nice point guard, and they have some nice young talent, and Josh Richardson and Justice Winslow, 2 guys that I really like. But I mean, the only reason I have them up here as number 6 is because I think they're better than the other, in my opinion, quote, crapshoot teams in the Eastern Conference, but they're not finishing top 5. All right, number 7, I'm going with the Washington Wizards. The Wizards managed to make the playoffs as the 8th seed last year, with John Wall only playing for half the season. He played in 41 games. But I think the fact they made the playoffs just last year has more to do with the weakness of the Eastern Conference rather than the strength of Washington's roster outside of John Wall. Listen, Bradley Beal is really good, but besides him and John Wall, there's just really not much on their roster to get too excited about. All right, the Detroit Pistons. So I have them at the number 8 seed. I have them getting the last spot in the Eastern Conference playoffs. They went 16-16 in 30 and 32 games after acquiring Blake Griffin last season, which I just don't think is as good as they had hoped after acquiring him. However, again, they're in a weak Eastern Conference, and finishing just above 500 is really all a team needs to do to make the playoffs. Plus, now they've had a whole offseason to kind of get everything together. They have a new coach in Dwayne Casey. I think they're going to have a pretty solid year. All right, at the number 9 seed, I have the Charlotte Hornets. I mean, they just disappoint every year, and this year is not going to be any different, I don't think. I mean, outside of Kemba Walker, there's really no potential all-stars on this team. And, if you look at all of the teams I have making the playoffs, and, really in both conferences, they have at least 2 potential all-stars, right? I mean, the Pistons, Griffin and Drummond. The Wizards have John Wall, Bradley Beal. The Heat, I would say Dragic and Whiteside, if they played him, he has the potential to be an all-star. But outside of Kemba Walker on the Hornets, there's really nobody there. So I have them finishing just outside of the playoffs at number 9. All right, number 10, we have the defending Eastern Conference champion, Cleveland Cavaliers. I mean, without LeBron James, this team's just not going to win many games. Listen, when Kevin Love was the lone superstar in the Timberwolves, he never once made the playoffs. And I don't really expect that trend to change here. Now that he's the lone star on the Cavs. I mean, the rosters are pretty similar, actually, to each other when you think about it. Those Timberwolves teams and this Cavs team. The Eastern Conference is weak. They could squeak in. I can't see it happening. I think losing LeBron is going to be too much of a culture shock to that entire organization. All right, next up here at number 11, I have the Chicago Bulls. And I think the Bulls may actually surprise some folks this year. Listen, Zach LaVine has had plenty of time to recover from his torn ACL, so he's going to be back. Chris Dunn has looked pretty solid in his time as a Chicago Bull. Larry Markkinen looked really promising last year, although he's injured currently, but he'll be back. And then they added Jabari Parker, the former number 2 overall pick, who, he's talented. He just has had to deal with multiple significant injuries in his career. So I don't think they're going to make the playoffs this year, but I think they're definitely going to win some games, and they'll probably be pretty close to that 8 seed. That's what I'm expecting, at least. All right, here we go. Number 12, I have the New York Knicks. And believe it or not, I don't think the Knicks' success is going to be completely dependent on when Kristaps Porzingis comes back. I mean, Enes Kanter, Tim Hardaway Jr., and many of their young first and second year players, they should be able to actually put together a nice few nice games, at least until Porzingis returns. And when Porzingis returns, if he returns, I think he will, the Knicks should be able to get some wins. So I have them at the 12th seed. Not the bottom of the barrel, but not anywhere close to the playoffs. All right, number 13, I have the Brooklyn Nets. And I was kind of going back and forth, do I go Knicks then Nets or Nets then Knicks? But I decided to go with the Knicks first and then the Nets here at 13. Many Nets players last year showed they had some potential, like Spencer Dinwiddie, Jarrett Allen, D'Angelo Russell actually looked pretty good in the Brooklyn uniform. The Nets are on the rise, but they're just nowhere close to the playoff picture yet. All right, number 14, I have the Orlando Magic, and the Magic are bad. There's really no other way to say it. They have some nice, promising young players, I guess. I will admit I'm very excited to see what Mo Bamba can do, but I just don't think that's a great fit for him. And I feel bad for him, honestly, because I think he's a good young player. I can never have confidence in the Orlando Magic, to be honest. All right, finally here, number 15, I have the Atlanta Hawks. And I believe Trae Young is just going to have an awesome season. There are no expectations for him, meaning he is free to be himself and just kind of be loose on the court, not have to deal with too much stress. However, the Hawks roster, it's really young, and it's just honestly really bad. Okay, now I'm going to move on to my projected Western Conference standings, and keep in mind, the Western Conference is much more competitive than the East, so a lot of these picks were much tougher for the West than they were for the East. Number 1 seed here, I'll start off with the Golden State Warriors. The Warriors are far and away the best team in the NBA, and with Houston getting worse over the offseason, I expect the Warriors to reclaim the number 1 seed in the West. Even if it doesn't take a ton of wins, I think they'll be able to put together enough wins to get over the Rockets. Number 2, speaking of the Rockets, I've been finishing number 2 in the Western Conference. I still think they're going to finish with the 2nd seed. I still think they're a good team. as long as Chris Paul and James Harden are there, they're going to win games, and as long as they're healthy. They're still better than most others in the West. I hated the fact that they lost Trevor Ariza, and they lost Luke Mbah and Mute, two guys that I think were kind of a crucial part of that defensive identity for the Rockets last year. But they added Carmelo Anthony, I guess. I don't think he's gonna. I mean, he may fit there offensively, but I just don't know how many minutes you can give him at the end of games when you need a big defensive stop. Whether it's against a Warrior, Warriors are a really good NBA team, or even in the playoffs. So, Rockets are finishing second in my opinion, but they are not nearly as strong as they were last year. All right, number 3, I have the OKC Thunder. Paul George is going back to OKC, which means this team is going to compete for a top seed in the Western Conference again. Again, I think getting rid of Carmelo Anthony was actually addition by subtraction. They get to not have to start him every game. And Andre Roberson's going to be back later in the season. I know he suffered a setback in his recovery, but hopefully he'll be back soon. They're not as good as the Rockets in my opinion, but they should finish pretty close to them in the standings. I actually wouldn't be shocked if they finished above the Rockets, but I think they'll finish just below the Rockets with the third spot in the Western Conference. All right. Number 4 here, I got the New Orleans Pelicans. I'm going to keep this one short and sweet. This team really got going in the playoffs last year. Drew Holiday looked really good, and we all know about Anthony Davis. I like this team a lot, and they added Alfred Payton. They got rid of. I think losing DeMarcus Cousins is actually going to help this team. I just think it was kind of clogged in the middle with both of them there. And again, we saw they did better actually without Cousins. At least from what I saw, they were playing better. They lost Rondo. I don't think that's a huge loss. I don't think he would have really fit there long term. But so I got the Pelicans finishing number 4. All right, number 5, I got the Denver Nuggets. The Nuggets seem to always be that team that fails to meet their expectations. But I believe that this is the year that the Nuggets finally crack the code and find success. Nikola Jokic is really good. Gary Harris and Jamal Murray are young and hungry, and they're adding back Paul Millsap coming off he's injured for the latter half of last year, and I think they have a good recipe for a good year. All right, next up at number 6, I have the San Antonio Spurs. And if you're a longtime listener of the Courtside podcast, then you will know that I really liked what the Spurs got in return for Kawhi Leonard. The loss of DeJounte Murray hurts, but I believe DeMar DeRozan will fit nicely with Greg Popovich, and they have some really good shooting coaches there to help him with his three-point jumper, and I think he's really going to help lead the Spurs to the playoffs. All right, number 7, I got the LA Lakers. I can't bet against LeBron James making the playoffs. I think it would be crazy to not include the Lakers. This team is full of young talent that is going to get the chance to learn from one of the best to ever play in LeBron. And, I even though this may be a development year for the franchise and for the players, it doesn't mean they can't make the playoffs, especially if they start playing really well. So I like the Lakers to squeak into the playoffs as the 7 seed. And finally, the last playoff team that's going to make the Western Conference playoffs, I have the Utah Jazz with the 8 seed. And the Jazz finished with the 5th seed last year, so I know what you're thinking. Oh, how are they going to slip in the standings? Donovan Mitchell's only getting better. Really, Rudy Gobert's only getting better. That team in general is only getting better. But they finished just 2 games above the 9th seed Nuggets last year. They're a good team, but compared to the teams I have finishing above them, I just don't think they're good enough to separate themselves from the pack. Listen, it could be really close and really tight, but I just have them just squeaking into the playoffs at number 8. All right, number 9 in the Western Conference, I have the Minnesota Timberwolves. This team is loaded with talent, but the Jimmy Butler situation is enough for me to question their ability to make the playoffs. Even if they keep Jimmy Butler, there's a lot of turmoil there between him and the front office and even a little bit with the coaching staff. And if Jimmy Butler does happen to be traded at some point, I just don't think Minnesota has enough established talent to make the playoffs. They're young; they still have time to grow, but I don't have them making the playoffs this year. All right, number 10. This one was kind of tough for me, but I have the Portland Trailblazers. Outside of Damian Lillard and C.J. McCollum, I don't think there's enough talent for this team to make the playoffs in the West. I find it really unfortunate because Lillard and McCollum are one of the best backcourts in the NBA. They're just so good. But until the Blazers add talent around them, I just don't think they're going to be able to compete for a championship or even compete for the playoffs. All right, number 11 here, I have the Dallas Mavericks, and I really like the Mavs as well. And if they were in the East, I would project them to make the playoffs easy. I think Luka Doncic is a stud. Dennis Smith Jr. has already proven himself to be a stud. They added DeAndre Jordan as a rim protector. They have Harrison Barnes and Wesley Matthews, a couple nice veterans. I just think it's going to take too much time for this team to come together and gel this year to make the playoffs. But they have a really bright future, I think. All right, here we go. Number 12, I have the Los Angeles Clippers. I mean, the Los Angeles Clippers, I feel like, just have 30 average players, then Tobias Harris, who's like a little tick above average. Like, you know, he at least has shown some potential of being really good. But just in the Western Conference, having a bunch of average players and a good coach is just not going to be enough to make the playoffs. All right, number 13, I have the Memphis Grizzlies. And, you know, as long as the Grizzlies still have Mike Conley and Marc Gasol, they can win some games. But Gasol's getting really old, and he really showed his age last year, I thought. Mike Conley's coming off a major heel injury. They're also paying a ton of money to Chandler Parsons, which they could have allocated elsewhere into some other young talent. So I don't expect anything from the Grizzlies this year. All right, number 14 in the West, I have the Sacramento Kings. And the Kings actually have a lot of young talent and a lot of hype entering the 2018-2019 season, which is more than can be said for really any season in the past, I don't know, decade plus. However, they really aren't built for success this year. And in fact, I would say the Kings' success this year will be based off of how much their young players improve and grow, rather than being based off how many wins they get. And finally in the West, at the number 15 seed, I'm going with the Phoenix Suns. Similar to the Kings, they have a lot of young talent that's just not ready to make the leap into the playoffs yet. I really like Devin Booker. I don't know how anybody can't like Devin Booker. I really believe in DeAndre Ayton. I think he was the right pick at number 1, but they are going to need a few years before they can contend for the playoffs. Alright, so now I'm going to give my predictions for the major NBA awards. I'm going to go over MVP, Rookie of the Year, Coach of the Year, Sixth Man of the Year, Most Improved Player, and Defensive Player of the Year. Not necessarily in that order, but here we go. Alright, let's start with Coach of the Year, and I'm going to go with Mike Budenholzer of the Milwaukee Bucks. I'm going with him for a couple reasons. Number 1, I think Milwaukee is going to have a really good season. I think they're going to finish top 3 in the East. And second of all, if Giannis has a great year and the Bucks rise from number 7 to number 3 in the standings like I expect them to, it's going to be hard not to give him the award just because I think a lot of these guys voting on Coach of the Year and whatever award it may be, they care about, you know, how much the team improved from last season to this season. All right, Most Improved Player. This one is one of the most toughest. It's one of the toughest to predict. I'm going to go with Miles Turner. Again, you're basically choosing from the entire pool of non-star players for this award, so it's really tough to pick. But again, I'm going with Turner here. You know, last year Victor Oladipo burst onto the scene and took home the award. And I think his teammate this year is going to have, you know, he's going to take a big leap, and really, I think he's going to help the Pacers compete for a spot in the NBA Finals. Right? I mean, you have Victor Oladipo, Miles Turner, kind of anchoring that team. Tyreek Evans coming off the bench. You got some other nice talent there. So I'm going with Miles Turner as Most Improved Player. All right, Sixth Man of the Year, and listen, maybe this is just because he's one of my favorite players in the league. I'm going to go with Terry Rozier. Listen, Eric Gordon and Lou Williams are really good, but I don't really want to be boring and go with one of those guys. I think Terry Rozier has an outsider's chance to win Sixth Man of the Year. And again, maybe I do feel this way because he's one of my favorite players, but... And by the way, the fact that he's one of my favorite players is another story for another day. Maybe I'll talk about it one day. I don't know. But the Celtics bench struggled to score points at times last year, and especially, you know, during the regular season, I think that was probably their biggest weakness was bench scoring. But the Celtics often won the games where Rozier came off the bench and scored double-digit points behind Kyrie while Kyrie was still healthy. And so I expect Brad Stevens to actually place a pretty high importance on Rozier getting the ball and scoring coming off the bench. So I like Terry Rozier kind of as like a dark horse potential winner for the Sixth Man of the Year award. All right, Defensive Player of the Year. I'm going back to just kind of sticking with the pack. I'm going with Anthony Davis. I mean, he's one of the best two-way players in the entire NBA, and he was the runner-up for Defensive Player of the Year last year. I think with the Pelicans winning more games this year, like I expect them to, I think his defensive prowess will really get the recognition it deserves. Although, being from Boston, I wouldn't mind if he requested a trade and tried to come up here to Boston. Anyways, moving on to Rookie of the Year. I'm going to go with Luka Doncic. And again, kind of, an obvious choice, one of the more popular choices. But I said it before and I'll say it again. Luka Doncic is just an absolute stud. I loved when the Mavericks traded up to get Luka Doncic. And if you listen to, I believe it was the first episode of the Courtside podcast, I did winners and losers. And I chose the Mavericks as winners and the Hawks as losers. I really love that trade for the Mavericks. I think he's going to fit really well. I think he's going to fit in really well with Dallas. And if he plays really well, I mean, maybe they contend for the playoffs as early as this season. But I think the offense is going to be really built around him and giving him the opportunity to win Rookie of the Year. And finally, for my MVP award choice, I'm going to go with Giannis Antetokounmpo. And again, I said it a couple times. I think Milwaukee's success this year is going to be dependent on the Greek Freak's production. To me, the MVP award is not only based on a player's individual success, but also his team success. And kind of, I mentioned this a little bit before with Budenholzer, but, how much a team improves from one year to the next. And make no mistake, without Giannis, the Bucks would probably not even make the playoffs. So I believe Giannis is going to come out strong right out of the gate, have a career year, leading the Bucks to, I would say, at least 50 wins. And the franchise's, which would be the franchise's best record since at least 2001. Alright, so I want to end off my NBA season preview episode by giving just a few bold predictions for the upcoming year. These may or may not correspond with my projected conference standings, just so you guys know. And I don't expect any of these to be correct, but I do think they all have the potential to be correct. So let's not waste any more time. Here we go. All right, bold prediction number 1, and I've kind of alluded to it a few times sprinkled throughout this episode, but that's the Dallas Mavericks making the playoffs. I believe the Mavs could sneak into the Western Conference playoffs as maybe the 8th seed. I don't believe there's going to be too much of a difference record-wise between the Thunder at number 3 and, all the way down to Dallas I had them at number 11. In fact, I would go as far as to bet that the difference in wins between the Thunder and the Mavericks, or whatever, 3-11, will be 5 games or less. That's kind of a bold prediction in and of itself. But anyways, again, the Mavericks have Luka Doncic, Dennis Smith Jr., who are two young studs on the rise. You also have some savvy veterans in Harrison Barnes, DeAndre Jordan, Wesley Matthews, Devin Harris, JJ Barea, others. And, they have a good coach in Rick Carlisle. And, they actually have a leader in Dirk Nowitzki, even if he's at the tail end of his career. So, I think you have the makings of a possible playoff team in Dallas. All right, bold prediction number 2 is Terry Rozier stays with the Boston Celtics. Again, choosing Rozier as my 6th man of the year prediction was bold in and of itself. However, I've heard a lot of people talk about how they think the Celtics will trade Terry Rozier before the trade deadline and try to get something for him before he leaves in free agency next year, because the Celtics probably won't be able to afford to keep him. But I believe the Celtics are going all in this year. I don't think they're going to make any trades that hurt their chances of winning this season at the trade deadline. So I just don't think they want to trade Terry Rozier. And even if they got some amazing package from him, they're just not. Let me rephrase that. They're not going to get enough in return for Rozier to justify trading him. And in all honesty, my favorite player, one of my favorite players in the NBA, is going to walk away next year, but he's going to be on the Celtics for this entire year. All right, bold prediction number 3. I have Nikola Jokic making a run at the MVP. And listen, everybody for the MVP award is going with the usual suspects: LeBron James, Anthony Davis, Kevin Durant. I'm falling asleep. And look, even I'm going with Giannis Antetokounmpo. However, I believe Nikola Jokic has an outside chance at the award. The Nuggets, to me at least, have the chance to finish as high as the 3 seed in the Western Conference and could come out at the 2 seed at best. So if they finish that high, I don't know how Jokic doesn't get any consideration for the award. He's by far their best player, and he's one of the best big men in the league. So I definitely give him a shot to win the MVP. And finally, my final bold prediction of this episode, and it's definitely by far the most bold out of all of them, is the Celtics break the regular season, single season win record. The Celtics have front-end talent. They have one of the best benches in the league. They have, at least in my opinion, the best coach in the league. And even when someone like Kyrie or Gordon Hayward has an off night, the team just has so much talent. They have enough talent to pick them up and get the victory. So, I mean, listen, this is kind of similar to what the Warriors had when they broke the record for regular season wins, right? They had Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, front-end all-stars. They had one of the best benches in the league that year. And they had a really good coach in Steve Kerr, who I think, his impact has kind of been minimized since Durant has gotten there. But make no mistake, he was really important to their success before Durant signed with Golden State. Listen, we all saw what they did. 73 wins in the regular season that year. So, even if the Celtics don't break the regular season win record, I still think they're going to win at least 70 games. Thank you guys all so much for tuning into this edition of Courtside. Join me next week where I will talk about some more things that don't make sense, do another edition of Sports Theory, and more. And remember to follow the Courtside Podcast on Twitter, @TheCourtsidePod. And remember to subscribe on YouTube, iTunes, or wherever. Signing off, this is Andrew Cohn. I will see you next time.